Welcome to Taurus TV. I'm Kezia Dawn. Thanks for joining me. Could you imagine how a professional sporting team would perform if it decided to get rid of its coach? Do you think the players could figure out what they'll do with themselves and still function as a team? It's almost unthinkable, isn't it? So why should it be any different in business? When leaders don't coach at all or coach poorly, it creates a gap in trust and respect. But leaders also need coaching. While they can work towards goals themselves, they also need someone to motivate them, focus their development efforts, and point out the differences between weaknesses that need fixing and weaknesses that don't. My guest today has gained experience in senior corporate roles, including Ford Motor Company in Australia and overseas, and for the last 10 years has run Shift Happens Consultancy that coaches and trains businesses. Welcome, Bec Martin. So Bec, do business CEOs and executives readily accept having a coach?
Well, the ones that work with me do, yes. But to answer your question more broadly, there is great acceptance of coaching. I've worked with some great leaders over the years, and I think the one thing that, when I reflect on those great leaders that they have done, is they've sought out coaches, they've sought out mentors and advisors at all different levels throughout the organisation to make sure that they're getting both external and internal inputs so that they can be the best they can be. And I think your analogy of the sports person or team is a great one, because if you're an elite sports person, you have all these different coaches. I've got a friend who's a netball umpire, and her goal, she set herself her goal of being selected for the Commonwealth Games this year, and as one of the umpires, and she got herself a fitness coach, a nutrition coach, a wellness coach, a mindset coach, so that she could be at her peak performance at those Commonwealth Games, A, to get selected, and then B, when she was there. And so she's currently an umpire at the Commonwealth Games. And I think that applies to leaders as well. For them to make sure that they're at their best for their teams and to be able to achieve the goals for their business, having external inputs like a coach, a mentor, or an advisor is a really good thing for them.
So Bec, what's the most common areas that executives need to be coached in?
Yeah, so there's three main areas that I get called upon for. The first one is around strategic direction. So as a business owner or a leader, even if you're a leader of a business unit, you still want to make sure that you've got your strategic direction for your team and you've got your annual plan, which are the goals that support that strategic direction. So a lot of organisations I work with, we spend a bit of time on developing the strategic plan, so looking at the purpose, the vision, the values. Are they living those values? And then what are the strategic priorities under that? And then what's the annual plan to support those strategic priorities? And then it's about helping that leader stay accountable to delivering that plan. And I know that sounds ridiculous, right? Because a lot of people have said, well, why do businesses need that help? Don't they just do it? But let's face it, it's hard running your own business or running a business unit or running a big business to keep everything on track. And so having someone that, you know, is able to help hold you and your team accountable to achieving and moving forward, because they're often not, you often get sucked into the business as usual stuff, right? Because that's the urgent stuff that you need to get done. And so that's the first area of support that I often get asked to help with. The second one is around culture, communication and collaboration. And I'm getting more and more requests for that at the moment. And if you think about the environment we're in, there's a lot of hybrid work occurring, and that's created a shift in how people are collaborating and communicating. And it's also shifting in some ways some of the culture of businesses. And so a number of leaders have called on me to help them re-establish those communication channels, work out how they can better collaborate, and look at the culture again and what are the simple things that they can do to reinforce that culture. I think that's a really important one, because I was with a group of CEOs the other day and we were lamenting that you've got all of these all of this technology, right, that can help us, And yet we all seem to be more time poor, less productive, there's more communication issues. And so whilst technology is an enabler, sometimes it just gets back down to the fundamentals, like how are you communicating? You know, how are you collaborating? So that's the second area. Then the third one is about the individual. And so that's around a number of individual leaders will say they want to be coached on executive presence, or they want to, you know, if they're in a larger organisation, how do they make sure when they've got that seat at the table that they're able to have a voice? It could be around sales skills, it could be around running effective meetings, being more persuasive. And in that individual space, it's often interesting helping the leader identify what are the blind spots. So we were talking about before about elite sports people. Their coaches help identify those blind spots and then help them work out a plan to fix it. So if Roger Federer's, you know, hitting his forehand incorrectly every third time he's hitting it, his coach is going to help him identify that blind spot and then put a plan in place and then hold them accountable to actually trying to change their behaviour or their habit and the way that they're executing it. So they're really the three main areas.
And there's a difference, there's a lot of with leaders and leadership, there's a massive difference between being a leader and obviously actual leadership.
Yeah.
So do you think CEOs and executives these days really understand what leadership is?
Yes. I mean, it depends on the leader, obviously. But I think being a leader is tough, right? And you look at the current environment, it's hard. It's hard work. I look at great leaders and I think, oh, well, you know, often we get asked or someone says to you, oh, wow, they just demonstrated, you know, really strong leadership, whether it's a politician or a leader in, you know, a business. And that makes me think, so what does demonstrating strong leadership really mean? And when I think about that, I think, okay, it's the way they're acting and behaving. It's the things that they're saying and doing that are the things that are demonstrating the leadership qualities. So they're a leader and they're behaving in a certain way, which is really important, whether it's them trying to inspire their teams, whether they're living those values, so they're actually behaving in a way that's congruent with the values of the organisation, whether it's you know, helping their teams become more efficient and productive. They're the behaviours that demonstrate, or the leadership qualities and behaviours that demonstrate leadership. So yeah, I think they do understand what leadership means, but it's hard, and most leaders I work with are constantly trying to work out how they can be the best they can be for both their teams and for their business to achieve their goals.
And Sharon, you've worked very closely with Bec over the last, you know, years through her journey with Taurus. What qualities does she bring to the table when it comes to business mentoring and leadership?
So Bec's always given me a beautiful practical mirror image of what it is that I want to do with the business, and helped me work out how to actually plot that in the fastest, most practical way. So she's hugely practical and can listen to me and put those things down into a document that we get by the end of the day, which is fast tracks me perhaps not having time to do that or finding it a slower process. And then a sounding board, absolute sounding board for, I don't think any leader doesn't want to be a great leader. We're all trying to do our best. There's very few people you meet in the world who don't want to be a good leader or don't want to do their job properly. But I think for me, Bec is giving me the opportunity to have a sounding board and reflect that back into the business with the best impact.
Recent Australian surveys have shown that CEOs are concerned about upskilling and retaining their workforce. They're almost at war with talents in their workplace. What do you sort of see in this?
Yeah, it's a very topical question, and we spend a lot of time with most of my clients talking about this. I always bring it back to the employee experience. So you've got, you know, businesses are trying to do their best to attract, recruit and onboard new staff. And then the most important thing, I think, is thinking about that next stage of the employee experience. So how are you engaging, developing and retaining your people? And there's a number of ways that you can do that through development. I don't advocate just throwing training as a way to try and retain. I don't advocate just throwing money, because there's a lot out there at the moment in terms of, well, I can go and get, another job for $20,000. It's about how do you, in your business or organisation, create a combination of programs that help individuals develop. Because what you don't want to do is create a cookie cutter environment where you just say, okay, so I'm going to try and retain my staff, so I'm just going to throw this development program at them. I'll throw some coaching, maybe some of this, and they'll be fine. I'll throw on some lunches, some lunch and learns, whatever. When I'm working with clients, I'm saying, let's work out what combination works for your organisation, because it won't be the same for every organisation. And for the individuals in that organisation. So it's thinking about things like, would a mentoring program be useful, whether it's an internal, external? Would some training to upskill in certain areas be useful? One of the things that I learnt at Ford, and I was fortunate enough to do, was I went on a shadowing program. And that just gave me so much exposure to different areas of the business that it enriches and helps that individual, me in that case, learn and grow. And often we just think, well, we've employed that person to do that job. They're not really interested in the rest of the business. I think for leaders, having the mindset, my people really want to learn and grow, and most of them are interested. They want to come to work for a reason, and they want to come to work and be stimulated. So how can we provide opportunities for them to do that? And I think the shadowing program for me was a great one. I think Qantas had something similar. They called it walk a mile in my shoes. And so they did something like, a cabin crew could go and work with an engineer on the apron. So they learnt, and what that does, I think, as a program and to help in retention, it builds that empathy within the organisation. So, when I was at Ford and I went down to the production line as a shadowing thing, I got a whole new appreciation for what those people on the line had to deal with. And so it made me more aware of the business. And so I think it's about thinking, what are the clever things that you can do as a leader that will engage and stimulate and develop your people?
I guess it's ultimately about having that understanding, isn't it, between employers and employees. Now, Sharon, you've worked with 1,000 people and brands over the past 27 years. What would you say is the biggest concern for CEOs?
I think it's trying to grow people within the environment you've got in the best way possible for them. And I was going to say, when you first asked me, keeping everyone happy, it's very hard to keep everybody happy. But one does one's best to do that. And the only way I feel I've done that as a leader is to listen to what they want and then deliver that. So we've been very bespoke in the way we've grown our people, and some of those people are still with us after 20 years.
Yeah.
And others, of course, come through the business and don't stay. So they cross the platform and they get on another train.
Yeah. And I think that's also the key, right? You don't necessarily have to be that worried if people aren't retained, because they go on and they do things that are going to, you've helped them on their
You can watch them grow.
Yeah, and you're
absolutely.
part of their growth path. So that's, I think that's a really lovely thing.
Yeah. And Sharon, to what extent do you see core practices playing a role in the overall growth of a business?
Core practices. I was lucky enough to read the E-Myth when I started out in business, which helps you template a business. And as a professional services firm, that really helped me be able to put set systems and processes in play. But then, of course, you don't want to or dumb everything down to those templates and processes. So I think a base of process and core process is great, and then every year you look to blow it up and work out how you can do it better.
And Bec, obviously the pandemic has caused so many disruptions for businesses. So coming out of the pandemic and that transition, what have you noticed the priorities to be for CEOs?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, definitely I would say communication and how they get their teams to collaborate. And the other thing, the productivity report just came out, and I think the other key thing is productivity is on the minds of a lot of CEOs and leaders that I deal with, and how can they create an environment where their teams do become more productive. And it was what I was talking about before in terms of the communication and collaboration that could be slowing things down. And so how do you then, to your point about going back to the core processes and things like that, sometimes it's those basic processes, like how do you run meetings, are they efficient, are the processes that you've got in place, are they still effective for your business? And I think coming out of the COVID, one of the considerations for businesses is my work environment's changed in a lot of cases, so there's more of this hybrid work, and then how do we adapt those processes to hybrid work to get the best result? And I think that's on the minds of a lot of CEOs, because there's some businesses that say they've perfected it and they've done it, but I think there is still, even if you're a business that's face-to-face, so I work with childcare and construction, they're still face-to-face, and aged care, but they've got to revisit their processes because some of their staff are now hybrid working versus the frontline staff. So it is always about, I think, how do you continue to evolve your business and bring your people along with you to make sure that you achieve the goals that you're setting out to achieve.
And are these areas, are they areas that CEOs you're watching now, or that you think CEOs should be seeking support and coaching for?
Again, I think it might not necessarily be coaching. So like I said before, a number of the CEOs that I work with or leaders that I work with will seek inputs from different areas. So coaching is one, yes. And some leaders can have an internal coach as well. So in some of the larger organisations, an internal coach can be useful. External coach, yes. Mentors, great way to get input. And I think a number of the businesses I work with very successfully have advisors or an advisory board. And when you've got those different inputs as a CEO or a leader, that's where you can continue to get challenged. It can provoke your thinking, and then that can lead you to being able to make better decisions and try and be the best that you can be as a leader, to your point, Sharon.
And in terms of the people you work with, the people you support, what do you bring to them, and what qualities do you believe you bring that makes you a good coach and a good supporter for them?
That's a good question. Primarily, I like to do a number of things. Obviously, I like to help the individual or the team or the organisation grow. And when I say grow, I don't mean taking it necessarily a revenue growth. That to me is not necessary. It might be nice, but there's some businesses I work with that are happy with their current revenue. And so what I'm talking about growing is how can they evolve and expand and do things differently that they might not have thought about before. So one of the things I try to bring is that, to challenge their current thinking, not for the sake of challenge. That's not what I try to do. I try to make sure that I'm just looking at things from a different perspective, or I'm asking questions that can get that leader to reflect upon either how they're behaving, how they're acting, or the decisions they're making, the processes that they've got in place. So yeah, I find that what I can bring to the table is to help challenge them, provoke their thinking, get a shift in their thinking, make shift happen. I had to get that in somewhere. But then mainly accountability, and importantly, how do you sustain that, right? Because a lot of what I do is try to change behaviour or affect some change. And it's easy to affect the change or implement the change, but it's that process about bringing people along with, and then how do you embed it and sustain it, whether it's an individual behaviour I'm trying to help them change and sustain, or whether it's a team behaviour, or whether it's an organisational behaviour. So that's what I hope that I can bring to leaders and organisations.
Well, they're great qualities to have as a person, and it's a great conversation. It's so relevant right now with all the change that's happening in business. Thank you, Bec. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kezia Dawn.